The cream-colored envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days, a silent reminder of everything I'd been avoiding. The gold-embossed letters caught the light every morning, taunting me. I knew what it was. The invitation to my mother's 55th birthday gala. Vivian Mack, the woman who had spent my entire life molding me into something I was not. But it wasn't just an ordinary invitation. It had a handwritten note inside. Your presence is required. Come learn your fate. The words sent a chill down my spine. I had been dodging it, burying my anxiety under layers of denial, until Grayson, my cousin, texted me urgently. Did you open it yet? That was enough to make me finally pick it up. I tore open the envelope, the thick paper feeling like a weight in my hands. Inside was the invitation, printed in gold, and that note from my mother. I hesitated. My last public appearance at one of her events had ended with her publicly shaming my career as an artist. She had ridiculed me in front of her friends for choosing such a wasteful life. I didn't know if I was ready for more of that humiliation. But Sophie, my best friend, had other ideas. She was firm. You need to face her. You need to show up. I paced around the kitchen, the invitation still in my hands, my thoughts swirling. Grayson's voice crackled through the phone. Leighton called me yesterday, Morgan. He mentioned something about your grandmother's letter. That stopped me cold. My grandmother, Elizabeth, had always been the only one who understood me, who supported my art and my decisions. She was the one who believed in me when no one else did. I had kept her letter hidden away for months, tucked in the bottom drawer of my desk, fearing the weight of whatever it contained. I didn't know why, but I had always felt that when the time was right, it would reveal itself to me. Grayson continued. Leighton wouldn't give details, but he said it's important. He mentioned the letter. His words were tinged with urgency. He believes your grandmother's letter has something to do with whatever's going down at the gala. Sophie looked at me, her curiosity piqued. What letter, Morgan? She asked, her voice soft but insistent. I didn't want to get into it, but the anxiety gnawing at me wouldn't let up. I made my way across the room, my heart beating faster. I'll show you, I said, my voice quiet, my hands already reaching for the locked drawer. The old key, which I hadn't used in ages, felt heavy in my palm as I turned it. Inside, I pulled out the envelope, its edges fraying from constant handling. I unfolded it, and my grandmother's neat handwriting greeted me. When the time comes, you will need to be brave. You will face a moment when you must act, when everything will change. Trust yourself. You are ready. Sophie leaned over my shoulder. This is it, Morgan. This is the moment. The gala, it's exactly what she meant. Whatever your grandmother left you, this could be your time to act. I held the letter tighter. Sophie was right. This was no coincidence. My grandmother had always known more than I did. Perhaps, just perhaps, this gala was the moment she had prepared me for. The locket around my neck felt heavier than usual, as though it was carrying the weight of something I hadn't yet discovered. It had been my grandmother's, and she had never taken it off. The antique piece had been left to me in her will, and though I wore it almost every day, I hadn't dared open it since the day she passed. There was something about it, a sense of finality, like unlocking a truth I wasn't ready to face. Tonight, the tension in the air felt thick, like it was pushing me toward something. My fingers traced the cold, smooth surface of the locket. Sophie noticed and raised an eyebrow. What's that, Morgan? You never take it off. I didn't answer right away. The locket, after all, wasn't just a keepsake. It had become my anchor, my reminder of the only person who ever truly saw me. And tonight it was calling me. I carefully unclasped the locket, the familiar click of the metal breaking the silence. As I opened it, I felt a rush of memories flood my mind. Grandma's voice, her laughter, the way she always told me I was destined for more than what the world expected. But what I found inside wasn't just a photograph or a token of her love. It was a tiny, folded piece of paper, crumpled from years of secrecy. I unfolded it gently, my breath catching as I read the words. The truth lies hidden, and when you find it, everything will change. Trust in what you know, Morgan. Follow the path your heart knows is right. I looked up at Sophie, the weight of the words sinking in. This was no ordinary message. This was a map, a guide. And it wasn't just about the gala, it was about something bigger, something that could change everything I thought I knew about my family and my life. The Grand Plaza was everything I had expected and more, an extravagant palace of glass and gold, standing tall in the heart of the city. As I approached the entrance, my heart thudded in my chest, a mixture of excitement and dread. The ballroom inside was an ocean of elegance, filled with the city's elite, their laughter and clinking glasses a sharp contrast to the knot in my stomach. The scent of expensive perfume and freshly polished marble wafted through the air. It was a world I had never truly fit into, a world my mother, Vivian, had meticulously crafted and expected me to embrace. I had made a conscious decision tonight. The emerald green dress I wore was a statement, sharp, bold, and daring, everything my mother had never wanted for me. She had insisted on pastel pink, the kind of color that whispered softness, submission. But tonight, I refused to be molded into her perfect, pastel vision. I was going to show up as myself. Sophie, my best friend, stood beside me, a comforting presence in the sea of polished faces. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair pulled back into a perfect bun, looking every bit the professional she was. Grayson, my cousin, was in his sharpest tuxedo, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble, though we all knew what was coming. He'd been in contact with Leighton, the family lawyer, who had warned us that tonight would change everything. As I stepped inside the ballroom, my mother spotted me from across the room. Her picture-perfect smile was in place, but her eyes were anything but welcoming. They were cold, calculating as they fixed on me. "Darling, you came," she said, her voice smooth like silk. But I could hear the underlying tension, the silent disapproval in every word. Before I could respond, my gaze landed on someone else in the crowd, Riker. My ex standing at the bar, his jaw sharp, his eyes betraying nothing. My breath caught in my throat. What was he doing here? Of all places, of all people, why was he at my mother's gala? Sophie was already working her magic by the time we arrived at the bar. She had her laptop open on the table in front of her, fingers flying over the keys. The ball was in motion now, and we were just waiting for the right moment. "I've hacked into the event planner's database," she said with a smirk, not even glancing up as she typed. "Let's see who's really here." Grayson leaned over her shoulder. "You got access to the entire guest list?" Sophie grinned. "Yep. And you're going to love this." I stood quietly by, trying to keep my composure. My nerves were beginning to fray as the minutes ticked by. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mother had planned this event with meticulous precision, too precisely. Every detail seemed designed to impress, to showcase the wealth and power she had spent her life accumulating. But it didn't feel like just a birthday gala. It felt like the calm before a storm. Sophie's voice broke my thoughts. "Check this out." She turned the laptop toward me, and I scanned the screen. "Every major business contact your family has us here. Government officials, CEOs, investors, your mother's really going all out." I took a breath. Something big was coming. Just then, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Leighton, the family lawyer, standing beside me, his face unreadable. "Everything's in place, Morgan," he said, his voice low. "You'll know when it's time." His words sent a chill down my spine. What exactly was in place? Was he talking about my plan? Or was there something more sinister happening tonight? Before I could respond, I felt someone watching me. I turned, only to lock eyes with Riker. He had crossed the room and was now standing just a few feet away, his expression both curious and cautious. "You look different tonight, Morgan," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "You sure about all this?" His eyes flicked around the room, as if he could sense the tension hanging in the air. I took a breath, my gaze steady. "I'm sure," I replied. This was going to be my moment. No turning back now. The lights dimmed suddenly, and the crowd grew quiet, all eyes turning to the stage. A microphone was adjusted, and then I saw her, the woman who had spent my life trying to control it, Vivian Mack, my mother. She stood at the podium, radiant in her silk gown, her smile flawless. The spotlight seemed to make her glow, but there was something darker behind her eyes. The crowd applauded, and she raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth as ever. But there was a sharp edge to it tonight. "Family means everything to me. It is my legacy, and tonight I have something important to announce." I felt my heart race as I stood in the crowd, Sophie and Grayson by my side. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. My finger hovered over the phone in my clutch, ready to trigger the digital release I'd set in motion. "As many of you know," my mother continued, her tone turning more theatrical, "the Mac family has always been about tradition, excellence, and power. Tonight, I am announcing some changes to our family legacy that will ensure it remains strong and untouchable for generations to come." The tension in the room thickened. It was a game of smoke and mirrors, and I was about to blow it all apart. I glanced at Sophie, who nodded slightly, confirming the timing. This was it. I pressed a button on my phone, sending the pre-planned release into motion. Within seconds, phones began to buzz around the room. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as people checked their devices. I knew what they were seeing, everything. The files, the evidence, the truth, were now live for the world to see. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped forward, purposefully walking toward the stage. I took a deep breath as I climbed the steps to stand beside my mother, whose smile faltered the moment she saw me. The applause died down, and the room grew eerily quiet. All eyes were on us. "Vivian," I said clearly into the microphone, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I think it's time you checked your phone." Her smile tightened as she glanced down, but I could see the shock in her eyes when she read the incoming notifications. The documents I had released were making their way through every phone in the room. I didn't wait for her to react. I spoke again, my voice louder this time. "I have the proof right here," I said, holding up the documents I had printed. "Proof that you've been embezzling funds from the family business, forging signatures, and manipulating assets to line your pockets. This isn't just about me. This is about everything you've done to our legacy." The room was in chaos now. People were scrambling to check their phones, murmurs of disbelief growing louder. Investors looked panicked, trying to contact their lawyers. Political figures were already moving toward the exit, distancing themselves from my mother. I turned to Leighton, who had moved to stand beside me. "Are these documents authentic?" I asked, knowing full well that he was the one who could confirm everything. Leighton nodded gravely, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Yes. These documents are legitimate. Elizabeth, Morgan's grandmother, left very specific instructions about how to handle this." Vivian's face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight, nails digging into my skin. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice filled with rage and disbelief. I pulled my arm away. "I've exposed the truth, Mother. It's over." Her face contorted with fury, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall, every inch of me defiant. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her. "I think it's time you tell them the rest, don't you? Tell them how you've been lying to everyone, betraying everyone." Vivian opened her mouth to shout, but the words faltered. Instead, she turned to the crowd, her voice shaking with fury. "You're all fools," she spat. "You think she's the one who's been wronged? She's the one who's destroying everything I've worked for." But it didn't matter. The crowd was already moving away from her, whispering, texting, and sharing what they had just learned. My mother's carefully crafted image was crumbling, and there was no saving it. "You're disowned," she shouted at me, her voice filled with venom. "You're nothing without me." I didn't flinch. I wasn't listening to her anymore. Leighton stepped forward again, his presence commanding. "This is the end of the Mac family's reign," he said calmly, his gaze steady on my mother. "And Morgan will make sure the truth prevails." As the last vestiges of my mother's power crumbled around her, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Finally, the truth had been exposed, and there was no more hiding. The battle was over, and for the first time, I had control. The chaos in the ballroom escalated quickly as more security guards poured in, swiftly taking control of the situation. The room, once filled with murmurs of disbelief, was now buzzing with the noise of people scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. My mother's carefully crafted empire was collapsing before her eyes, and she was desperately trying to hold onto whatever remained. It was at that moment that the FBI arrived, their presence sharp and authoritative. Agents Carter and Rodriguez stepped through the doors, their eyes scanning the room with cold precision. They wasted no time in approaching me, recognizing me as the one responsible for the files that had just been exposed. "Miss Mack," Agent Carter began, his voice professional yet tinged with urgency. "We've been investigating your mother's financial activities for months, but we couldn't build a solid case without the internal documents. What you've provided us today changes everything." I nodded, my mind still reeling from the events of the past hour. The shock hadn't fully worn off, but there was something else now: clarity. I was standing in the middle of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. Grayson stepped forward, his face grim. "While I was going through our grandmother's estate, I found some old documents, things she kept hidden. Among them were files linking our father's death to the company's secrets. Our father had been digging into Vivian's business dealings before his death. I think he was close to uncovering the truth." I stared at Grayson, disbelief flooding my veins. My father's death had always been shrouded in mystery. I had never suspected my mother's involvement, but now it all made a chilling kind of sense. Riker, who had been standing nearby, his expression conflicted, stepped closer. "Vivian once tried to recruit me into one of her business deals," he said quietly, his eyes darting to the agents. "I didn't know exactly what she was involved in, but the things she was asking me to do didn't sit right. I backed out, but I'm sure she's been running something far more dangerous than any of us realized." The words hung in the air like a warning. A murder, a conspiracy, and a web of corruption that spanned far beyond our family. As I stood there, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on my shoulders, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message that would change everything. "Your grandmother knew. Go to the lake house." The email had no sender, just a chilling message that sent a shiver down my spine. Along with the words, there was a video file. I opened it cautiously, my fingers trembling. The video flickered to life, revealing my grandmother, Elizabeth, much older, her face weary but resolute. "My dearest Morgan," her voice crackled through the speaker. "If you're watching this, then everything has come to light. But there is one last piece of the puzzle you must find. Go to the lake house. Check the boathouse behind the third panel on the east wall. What you find there will complete the truth. Trust no one but yourself." I watched the video in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. She had known. She had always known more than I had realized. The lake house, a place I hadn't thought about in years, suddenly felt like the key to everything. Sophie was already by my side, her eyes wide with realization. "We have to go. We can't waste any time. If Vivian is involved in something this big, we can't risk anyone else finding out before we do." Grayson nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm coming with you." We didn't hesitate. We had to go now, before anyone could stop us. The information we were about to uncover could change everything, and if Vivian was involved in the way we suspected, it might not just be our family that was at risk. But before we could leave, disaster struck. Vivian broke free from the security team that had been escorting her away from the chaos. She lunged toward us, her movements frantic. In her hand was a USB drive, and with a wild look in her eyes, she threw it toward me. "The truth is in there," she screamed, her voice laced with desperation. "Everything you need to know. It's in there." Before I could react, the FBI agents moved in quickly, restraining Vivian once again. She fought them off, her fury turning to madness as they dragged her away.
The drive.
The truth. Her last attempt to control the narrative, to hide whatever had been left. It was almost laughable she was too late. The documents were already out. The world had already begun to see her lies. But still, I couldn't ignore the USB drive. My hand hovered over it, but there was no time to think. Grayson was already grabbing my arm, pulling me away from the scene. "We need to go, now," he urged, his voice sharp with urgency. Sophie, ever the tech expert, grabbed the drive before anyone else could make a move. "We're not letting anyone get their hands on this," she muttered, stuffing it into her bag. The tension in the air was palpable. With Vivian detained, there was nothing holding us back now. We had a lake house to reach, a hidden truth to uncover, and a dangerous web of lies that could swallow us whole if we weren't careful. The FBI was here, but I wasn't sure we could trust them fully. Not yet. The race against time had begun, and there was no turning back. The rain slammed against the windshield, a relentless pounding that seemed to mirror the chaos in my mind. The storm had worsened as we neared the lake house, the winding roads barely visible through the sheets of rain. I gripped the seat in the back of Grayson's car, my thoughts swirling with the weight of everything we had uncovered. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "What you find there will complete the truth." The lake house loomed before us, dark and foreboding against the stormy backdrop. The familiar shape of it felt like a ghost from the past, a place of childhood memories that had been hidden behind secrets and lies for too long. We pulled up to the boathouse, the engine sputtering to a stop as Grayson turned off the ignition. We had no idea what we would find here, but we knew one thing for sure. Vivian's secrets were only the beginning. Sophie led the way, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. We had no idea if anyone was following us, but the urgency was clear. There was no time to waste. Inside the boathouse, the familiar smell of damp wood and old fishing gear hung in the air. Sophie quickly examined the wall, her fingers brushing along the old panels. "This is it," she said, her voice a mix of determination and disbelief. Behind this panel, Grayson stepped forward, helping her pry the panel loose. A hidden compartment revealed itself, dusty and untouched by time. Inside, there were several items, but one thing stood out. A thick file, its edges frayed from years of hiding. Sophie opened it carefully, scanning the documents. This is it," she whispered, pulling out sheets of paper and laying them across the table. The records contained secret bank accounts, coded communications, and, most shockingly, death certificates. One of them bore the name of our father, listed as accidental death. But the file told a different story. There was a trail of encrypted messages connecting powerful figures, politicians, CEOs, and law enforcement, to a larger organization called Project Legacy. Grayson read the documents over my shoulder, his voice low. "This isn't just about Vivian. This is a global network. They've been pulling strings for decades." I swallowed hard, the realization settling in like a cold weight. My father's death was no accident. It had been an assassination, orchestrated by the very people he had been investigating. "This is to end," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "We need to stop them." We barely had time to process what we had uncovered when the sound of engines roared in the distance. I turned toward the windows, my heart pounding as I saw the black SUVs pulling up to the lake house. Panic surged in me. We couldn't be caught now. Not when we were so close. "Move," Grayson yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the storm tunnel that led beneath the cottage. We ran through the rain-soaked woods, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder behind us. The tunnel was damp and narrow, but it was our only escape. The wind howled, pushing against us as we descended deeper into the darkness. But just as we thought we might escape, the harsh sound of men shouting filled the tunnel. I froze, fear rushing through me. They had caught up. Then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward, blocking our path. Uncle James. The shock hit me like a physical blow. Uncle James was dead. Or so I had thought. But here he was, alive, his face hard and unrecognizable. The man who had once been family was now standing in front of us, his eyes cold and filled with malice. "I knew you'd come here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're too late. Project Legacy is already in motion, and you can't stop it." Riker appeared from behind him, his usual calm demeanor now replaced with something darker. He was holding a gun, aimed directly at me. "You've been working with them all along, haven't you?" I asked, the betrayal stinging more than I cared to admit. Riker's lips curled into a cruel smile. You were always too naive, Morgan. You thought you could expose the truth, but you didn't see the bigger picture. Project Legacy is about control. Power. You're just a pawn in a much larger game. I backed away, my pulse racing. You've been lying to me. All this time, you were just using me. He shrugged, his finger tightening on the trigger. It's nothing personal. Just business. Before I could react, the sound of sirens cut through the night, and in an instant, the FBI stormed the property. Gunfire erupted, the chaos of a shootout filling the air as agents and Project Legacy's men clashed. Grayson grabbed me, pulling me into the chaos, while Sophie scrambled to get her laptop out of the bag, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We have to upload everything, she shouted above the noise. The agents moved in quickly, overpowering the armed men. Riker was shot in the leg, collapsing to the ground. He groaned in pain but managed to stay conscious, his eyes still glaring at me with venom. Uncle James was restrained by agents, his face twisted with fury as they cuffed him. His mask of invulnerability had shattered. And then, through the smoke, I saw my mother, Vivian, being led away by agents, her once impeccable appearance now a stark contrast to the chaos around her. She glared at me with a mix of hatred and disbelief. You think you've won, she spat, her voice raw. Project Legacy isn't finished. It'll rise again. I didn't flinch. It's over. You've lost. Leighton appeared, stepping through the chaos with calm authority. Vivian, you were never part of the corruption, he said, his voice steady. Elizabeth was. She spent years working to bring Project Legacy down, gathering evidence. Vivian's eyes narrowed, but her facade crumbled. I never wanted this. Elizabeth was right, but I couldn't let go. As Vivian was led away, I looked at the scene unfolding around me. The FBI was dismantling the remnants of Project Legacy, the conspirators falling one by one. I had exposed the truth. And finally, after years of hiding in shadows, the lies were being unraveled. The world would know who had really been behind the assassination of my father, the financial corruption, the manipulation of power. Project Legacy was no more. But for me, it was only the beginning. The truth had set me free, and now I was ready to rebuild. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Vivian sat still, her face a mask of stone, but I could see the tremor in her hands as the sentence was read. Vivian Mack, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison for embezzlement, fraud, and the unlawful transfer of assets. Your actions have been detrimental not only to your family, but to the many lives you manipulated and destroyed in your pursuit of power. The sentence is final. The words hung in the air like an unshakable truth. Vivian had spent her life building an empire of lies, but now the walls had come crashing down. I could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of years of secrets, betrayals, and lies. This was the end of her reign. As the guards moved to take Vivian away, she turned to me one last time. Her eyes, cold and calculating as always, softened for a brief moment. She said nothing for a long beat, but then, just before they ushered her out of the courtroom, she spoke. Morgan, she said, her voice surprisingly calm. You're stronger than I ever was. Those words pierced through the noise in my mind, the bitterness and anger that had built up over the years. I had spent so much of my life trying to break free from her shadow, resenting the woman who tried to control every aspect of my existence. But now, standing in front of her, I realized she had never truly seen me. In her final moment, Vivian had given me something I had been searching for all along, a recognition of my strength, a truth that I had been denying for so long. The courtroom doors swung closed behind her, and the room seemed to exhale in relief. Vivian was gone, and I was free. But the legacy she had tried so desperately to control would not be hers to claim anymore. It was mine now, my real legacy. As I walked away from the courtroom, I felt the weight of the decision that awaited me. I could have easily taken the wealth my mother had amassed, kept the money, the power, the influence. But I knew that wasn't the legacy I wanted. It was never about the riches or the empire. It was about what I could create with my own hands, with my own heart. That was why I had made the decision. The money would go to something far more meaningful than any luxury I could indulge in. I would use it to open the Legacy Arts Foundation, a place where young artists could find support, mentorship, and a platform to create without the pressures of conforming to the world's expectations. Grayson and Sophie stood by my side as we walked into the newly transformed Mac Enterprises building. The towering structure, once a symbol of my mother's control, now housed something entirely different. The foundation's new home was a space dedicated to creativity, freedom, and growth. No longer would the walls be filled with the echoes of corruption and greed. They would now ring with the voices of young artists, pushing boundaries and expressing themselves freely. We had done it. We had created something that would stand the test of time, something that would give back to the community and help others find their own voices. Grayson was there, handling the business side of things with his usual precision, ensuring everything remained independent from the taint of the family's past. Sophie helped with the organization of events, curating exhibits, and providing guidance to the emerging artists who walked through our doors. The foundation had already begun to make waves in the art community. The inaugural exhibit was scheduled to open in just a few weeks, showcasing work from the first group of scholarship recipients. The excitement was palpable. Young artists, many of whom had never been given the chance to showcase their work in a professional setting, were now getting the opportunity of a lifetime. As I stood in the middle of the new gallery space, looking out at the bright and hopeful faces of the artists who were creating their futures, I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be. This was my legacy, not one of wealth or manipulation, but of truth, of freedom, and of creation. A few days later, Agent Torres contacted me. She had been a quiet presence throughout the entire ordeal, but her role in bringing down Project Legacy was vital. She had helped expose the truth, worked alongside me to ensure Vivian's downfall, and provided the crucial final pieces of evidence that had led to the dismantling of the organization. When she arrived at the gallery, she handed me a small envelope. "This is for you," she said, her voice steady but kind. I opened it carefully, knowing it wasn't just a formal message. Inside was a letter from my grandmother, something I had never expected to receive. "Dear Morgan," the letter began, her familiar handwriting bringing tears to my eyes. "The real legacy isn't wealth or power, but truth. What you are building is more important than anything I could have left you. You have the courage to stand in the light, to uncover the darkness, and to create a future for others that is free from the lies that held us all captive. This is your inheritance, and I am so proud of you." The words were a balm to my soul, soothing the ache that had lingered for so long. My grandmother had always known, always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. She had left me not just a foundation, but a purpose. As I walked through the gallery, watching the artists work, seeing them create something that would outlast the legacies of those who tried to control them, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The gallery buzzed with life, filled with the kind of energy that could only come from truth and freedom. This was the beginning of something far greater than I had ever imagined. I stopped in front of one of the paintings, a piece by a young artist whose work had been inspired by her own struggles with identity and self-worth. It was a striking image of a woman breaking free from chains, her body bathed in light and color. I could see myself in it, my own journey reflected in her art. "This is it," I whispered to myself, knowing that I was finally free. The truth had set me free, and now I was building something new, something real. As I walked out into the courtyard, the evening sun casting long shadows over the newly renovated building, I couldn't help but smile. My grandmother was right. This was my legacy, the chance to help others find their voice, to embrace the truth, and to create a future that was theirs to shape. And in doing so, I was finally free from the shadow of the past.